Ningde, China. Inside a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Shanghai, hundreds of engineers and journalists go quiet as the lights drop. A number appears on the screen behind them, and for a moment, nobody in the room says anything. A battery pack the size of a suitcase is about to make almost every electric car on the road right now look outdated. Somewhere across the country, a rival company is racing to beat that number before the year is out. And in a lab connected to the Chinese Academy of Sciences, a chemist has just replaced a single atom in a battery's electrolyte, and in doing so, may have quietly rewritten what an electric car can do. None of these three things happened by accident. They happened because China's battery industry has spent the last 2 years locked in the most aggressive innovation race the auto world has seen since the invention of the internal combustion engine, and the results are starting to look less like incremental upgrades and more like a different category of machine entirely. This is real. It is not a concept render, and it is not a press release promising something 5 years away. Contemporary Amperex technology, known simply as CATL, is the largest electric vehicle battery manufacturer on Earth, supplying cells to Tesla, BMW, Volkswagen, Ford, and Mercedes-Benz. Its founder, Robin Zeng, was born in 1968 in the farming village of Ningde in Fujian province, and started his career at a state-owned shipbuilding enterprise before leaving after just 3 months to chase battery technology instead. He co-founded a smaller battery company in 1999, spun off its EV division into CATL in 2011, and by 2023 had built it into a company producing more than a third of the batteries powering electric cars worldwide. CATL's Hong Kong stock listing in 2025 raised more than $4.5 billion, the largest public offering anywhere in the world that year, and the company now reports well over $60 billion in annual revenue. At CATL's own Tech Day events in Ita, Shanghai, held in a converted industrial space in front of hundreds of media and industry watchers, Chief Technology Officer Gao Huan has stood on stage 2 years running and unveiled batteries that keep shrinking the gap between electric car and gasoline car down to almost nothing. Alongside CATL, BYD, China's other battery and EV giant, has been pushing its own blade battery and flash charging systems into production vehicles that are already being sold and driven today. This isn't a lab demo circulating on social media. This is two of the most well-funded, most scrutinized companies in the auto industry, publicly staking their reputations on numbers they know the entire world is going to test. To understand why this matters, you have to think about what has always made electric cars a hard sell. It isn't the driving experience. It's the two fears that sit in the back of almost every buyer's mind. How far can I go, and how long am I stuck waiting if I run low? Imagine a gas station where filling your tank took 45 minutes instead of 5. That's roughly the gap electric charging has had to close, and for over a decade it looked like physics simply wouldn't allow it. Batteries generate heat when they charge quickly, and too much heat too fast is how you get thermal runaway, the chain reaction behind battery fires. Charging fast without cooking the pack has been the single hardest problem in the entire industry. So when CATL says a battery can go from 10% to 80% charge in under 4 minutes, that's not a spec bump. That is a company claiming to have cracked one of the most stubborn physical limitations in modern engineering. Let's start with speed, because that's the number that changes daily life the most. In April of 2026, CATL unveiled the third generation of its Shengsing battery at its Shanghai Tech Day. This version supports a peak charging rate equivalent to 15C, meaning under ideal conditions, it can accept 15 times its total energy capacity in a single hour. Do the math on that, and you get charge times measured in single-digit minutes. According to CATL's own published figures from that event, the battery goes from 10% to 35% charge in about 1 minute. It reaches 80% in 3 minutes and 44 seconds. A nearly full charge, 10% to 98%, takes 6 minutes and 27 seconds. Even in brutal cold, at negative 30 degrees Celsius, the battery can go from 20% to 98% in around 9 minutes, a scenario that has historically crippled fast charging entirely. After 1,000 full charge cycles, CATL says the battery still holds more than 90% of its original capacity. Picture a coffee break, not a long one. The time it takes to walk into a service station, buy a bottle of water, use the restroom, and walk back out. That's now roughly the same amount of time it takes to refill hundreds of miles of range. BYD has been running its own version of this race in parallel, and the competition between the two companies is precisely what's driving the pace of change. This rivalry didn't start in 2026 either. Back in early 2025, CATL's second-generation Shengsing battery could already add about 520 kilometers, or 323 miles of range in 5 minutes, and CATL committed to putting that battery into more than 60 different EV models before the end of that same year. BYD's flash charging system, launched across several of its top-selling models in 2026, uses up to 1 megawatt of charging power delivered through a single cable adding roughly 250 to 400 kilometers of range, depending on the model, during a 5-minute stop. The company has already put this into consumer hands rather than keeping it in a lab. In May of 2026, BYD sent one of its Song Ultra models on a real-world trip covering more than 2,700 miles, relying on its Blade battery and 5-minute flash charging network the entire way, treating the run less like a controlled demo and more like a public stress test of its own technology. Meanwhile, BYD's luxury Denza brand has taken this same fast-charging architecture into Europe, launching the Denza Z9 GT with roughly 500 miles of range and 5-minute charging as its calling card, recruiting Daniel Craig to front the European launch. None of this fast charging would matter without the hardware to deliver that much power in the first place, and that race has been just as intense. Chinese EV maker Zeekr rolled out a 1.2 megawatt charger of its own, while BYD has already deployed charging stations capable of pushing a full megawatt through a single cable into a parked car, power levels that would have been considered dangerous, not just impractical, in most charging networks just a few years ago. This is the part that's easy to miss if you're only watching the headline numbers. China isn't producing one breakthrough battery. It's running 2 of the largest battery manufacturers on the planet against each other in public. And the pressure of that rivalry is what keeps shortening the timeline. Now here's the part that connects speed to range, because the two numbers feed off each other. A battery that charges in minutes is only transformative if it also holds enough energy to matter. And this is where CATL's Kielin condensed battery comes in. Unveiled at CATL's 2026 Tech Day, the Kielin condensed pack achieves a gravimetric energy density of 350 watt-hours per kilogram and a volumetric density of 760 watt-hours per liter, while weighing less than 650 kilograms. In an executive sedan, CATL says that translates to a driving range exceeding 1,500 kilometers, or roughly 930 miles on China's CLTC testing cycle. In a full-size SUV, the same battery family delivers around 1,000 kilometers, or 620 miles. For context on how far outside the normal range that is, the longest range production EV sold in the United States right now is the Lucid Air Grand Touring, at 12 miles on a single charge, a car widely considered the current benchmark for range. CATL's condensed battery, in its sedan configuration, is claiming nearly double that. And CATL didn't stop there. At the same event, the company also introduced what it calls the Freevoy Dual Power Battery, a system that splits its capacity into 2 zones, one tuned for everyday commuting, and a second, larger, extended range zone that activates for long trips. CATL says the combined package supports up to 932 miles of range, achieved partly through what the company calls self-forming anode technology, which it claims boosts energy density by 60% over a conventional pack. 932 miles. Say that out loud and it doesn't sound like a car anymore. It sounds like a small aircraft's range. That's the single number in this story worth sitting with for a second, because it reframes the entire conversation around electric vehicles. 932 miles is roughly the driving distance from Los Angeles to Denver in one battery without stopping. It's also close to the straight-line flight distance from New York to Miami. A number that large stops being about convenience and starts being about erasing the entire concept of range anxiety. And it isn't just theoretical for CATL either. The same underlying condensed battery chemistry has already been tested in the air. The company says it has flown a 4-ton aircraft using an earlier version of this technology, and CATL has set a goal of powering an 8-ton regional aircraft with a range between roughly 1,240 and 1,865 miles by 2028. When the company building your car battery is talking seriously about flight-certified aviation cells within the same family of technology, that tells you how much confidence sits behind these numbers internally, even before outside labs get a chance to verify them. And this is where the story gets interesting, because CATL and BYD aren't the only players chasing this. Chen Jun, an academician at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, led a research team that published a paper in the journal Nature detailing a new electrolyte system for EV batteries. Rather than tweaking the existing chemistry at the margins, Chen's team replaced oxygen atoms in the electrolyte with fluorine atoms, a change that sounds small on paper but has a significant effect on how the battery behaves at the molecular level. Lu Tianjun, general manager of China Automotive New Energy Battery Technology Company, the industry group formed to commercialize this research, said the resulting batteries deliver an energy density above 700 watt-hours per kilogram and support more than 1,000 kilometers, or 620 miles, of range on a single charge. Lu described it plainly, calling it, conservatively, an improvement of about 50% over current battery technology. That's not marketing language from a product launch. That's a research collaboration between academic scientists and industrial engineers, published through peer review, aiming for mass production by the end of 2026. At roughly this point, it's worth pausing to restack what we've actually confirmed so far, because there's a lot on the table. CATL's third-generation Shengsing battery can move from 10 to 98% charge in about 6.5 minutes. Its Qilin condensed battery pushes sedan range past 930 miles. BYD's flash charging network is already live in consumer vehicles, adding hundreds of miles in 5 minutes on cars people are actually driving today. And a peer-reviewed Nature paper backs a fluorine-based electrolyte breakthrough targeting over 700 watt-hours per kilogram. 4 separate teams, 4 separate approaches, all converging on the same conclusion within months of each other. In the next part of this, we get into the technology nobody expected to move this fast. Batteries that don't just charge quickly, they don't need liquid at all. Solid-state batteries have been the industry's long-promised holy grail for almost a decade, always described as 5 years away, no matter which year you asked. In China, that timeline has suddenly compressed. Chang'an, working alongside CATL, has already launched what the companies describe as the world's first mass-production sodium-ion passenger vehicle, powered by CATL's Naxtra battery. Naxtra uses sodium instead of lithium, delivering an energy density of 175 watt-hours per kilogram, a pure electric range between 186 and 248 miles, more than 10,000 charge cycles, and 90% capacity retention, even at negative 40 degrees, a temperature at which most lithium batteries struggle badly. Sodium is far more abundant and cheaper to source than lithium, which means this isn't just a performance story, it's a supply chain story that could make electric vehicles significantly less expensive to build. Chang'an has also said it plans to begin deploying full solid-state batteries, the kind that replace liquid electrolyte with a stable solid material entirely, for real-world validation in vehicles and robotics by the end of the third quarter of 2026, with mass production targeted for 2027. Dongfeng, one of China's oldest state-owned automakers, has taken its own swing at this with what it calls the Mach Super KV pure electric platform. The company says it has developed a 1,200-volt vehicle architecture paired with a 1,700-volt silicon carbide power module engineered in-house that enables charging at up to 2 megawatts. At that input level, Dongfeng claims its battery can add range at a rate of roughly 1.5 miles every second, which works out to around 280 miles in a 5-minute charge. Dongfeng also says it tested this battery down to negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit, where it retained over 72% of its capacity, and up to 266 degrees Fahrenheit on the high end, an extreme range meant to prove the pack can survive both Siberian winters and desert summers without falling apart. Here's the part that's easy to gloss over. None of these companies are treating this as a side project. Dongfeng, Chang'an, CATL, and BYD are 4 of the largest industrial employers in China, and all 4 are racing toward the same finish line at the same time, which is exactly the kind of pressure that tends to compress a 10-year technology roadmap into 2. Now, to be clear about what all of this actually means, and where the honest limits of these claims sit, a lot of the most eye-catching numbers in this story, including CATL's Qilin condensed range figures and Dongfeng's charging speed claims, are measured on China's CLTC testing cycle, which is widely acknowledged within the industry to be more lenient than the EPA testing standard used in the United States. That doesn't mean the numbers are false. It means a car rated for 930 miles under CLTC would likely test lower, probably somewhere in the 650 to 750 mile range under the stricter American cycle. Still a massive leap over today's best EVs, but not quite the number on the press slide. Similarly, Dongfeng's solid-state battery claims, along with several of the university industry collaborations feeding into this wave of announcements, have not yet been independently verified through peer-reviewed publication or third-party road testing. Chen Jun's Nature paper is a genuine exception here, since it went through formal peer review, but even that breakthrough is still years from a car in a showroom, and mass production timelines in this industry slip more often than they hold. It's also worth being precise about what's proven at the population level versus what's proven for any individual vehicle you could buy today. CATL's Shengsing third-generation charging figures come from controlled conditions at a company-run event, not from independent third-party testing across a large fleet of consumer-owned cars in everyday use. Nobody serious is claiming that every one of these technologies will land exactly as announced, on schedule, at the promised price. There's also a cost question that rarely makes it into the headlines. None of the 4 companies in this story have published a firm consumer price for their flagship long-range packs. And history in this industry suggests the first vehicles carrying condensed or solid-state batteries will command a real premium before prices come down through scale. The same pattern lithium-ion followed a decade ago, And geopolitics is its own separate caveat entirely. CATL has been placed on a United States list of companies with alleged ties to the Chinese military, a designation the company disputes, and a planned joint venture between CATL and Ford in Michigan has already drawn national security scrutiny in Washington. Whatever happens with any single battery chemistry, trade policy could end up deciding how much of this technology American drivers ever get to buy directly, regardless of how the engineering turns out. What is verifiable for multiple independent companies, in some cases already sold to real customers, is that the fundamental physics of fast charging and long range have both moved dramatically in the last 18 months in ways that were considered borderline impossible as recently as 2022. If you've made it this far, you've probably noticed the same pattern reappearing across every one of these announcements. Enormous claims, followed almost immediately by real vehicles, real customers, and real data. That's genuinely rare in the battery world, where prototypes tend to stay prototypes for years. So it's worth taking a second to like this video and subscribe if you want to keep tracking these announcements as they land, because the gap between unveiled on stage and sold in a showroom in China's EV industry right now is closing faster than almost any other technology sector on the planet. There's also a question worth sitting with before we close this out. If a 5-minute charge and a 900-mile range stop being the exception and start being the standard, the entire economic case for gasoline cars, and frankly, for a lot of existing electric ones too, starts to look shaky. Used EVs from just a few years ago, cars that felt cutting edge when they were purchased, could depreciate hard once. Buyers realize a car with triple the range and a fraction of the charging time now costs roughly the same to build. Go back to that warehouse outside Shanghai for a second, the one from the very start of this. The lights come back up. The number is still glowing on the screen behind Robinzung, and the room is still quiet, except now people are pulling out their phones to photograph. The slide before it changes. That single frozen moment is really the whole story in miniature. A country that, a little over a decade ago, was building batteries mostly for other people's smartphones, is now setting the pace for how every car company on Earth thinks about range and charging. Not through one miracle breakthrough, but through 4 or 5. Companies pushing each other publicly, on stage, in peer-reviewed journals, and on 2,700-mile road trips, all at the same time. Whether the exact number that gets you excited is 930 miles, 6.5 minutes, or a fluorine-swapped electrolyte published in Nature, the direction is the same and it's not slowing down. So here's what I want to know from you. Which of these felt more unbelievable to you? The idea of a 900-mile range on a single charge, or a battery that can go from nearly empty to nearly full in the time it takes to grab a coffee? Drop your answer in the comments and let me know which one you'd actually want in your driveway first.